All right, so today we are going to cover the first part of the cognition unit, which is the largest part of it, memory. I can't promise that I will get through all of this. Memory, if you remember, is a massive unit, and so I'm going to kind of try to hit like the main stuff that we need, that you would need, but I don't know if we'll be able to get through all of it. I am supposed to be sharing my screen. Thank you, but yep. All right, there we go. All right, so if you have any questions, put it in the chat because I'm gonna go fast like I've been doing. All right, so memory. All right, so last time we talked about learning. All right, once we learn something, it's obviously committed to memory. Memory, the definition of memory is the persistence of learning over time, through the retrieval and storage of information, through the storage and retrieval, and should have encoding in there too. All right, so a couple of important terms that they do like to put on FRQs. All right, recall. All right, how do we measure retention? Okay, how do we measure how much we have remembered? Okay, recall is the process of just retrieving something out of your memory that is not currently in your conscious awareness. Right? So an example of a recall task, a lot of times you're not necessarily going to have, you might, but not necessarily going to have a cue. Okay, an example of a recall task would be an FRQ. Okay, so recall is literally just pulling the information out of your memory. All right, recognition, another way to measure retention. Okay, this is when, with recognition, we have some sort of cue to jog our memory. An example of this would be a multiple choice question. Right? And then relearning, which is what we are doing right now. Let me let the person in. Relearning is when you've learned something once, and then you go back and you learn it again. And the second time you learn something, it is easier to do than the first time because you already have those neural connections. So kind of the purpose of these review sessions is just to kind of jog your memory to get those neural connections back working again, that LTP back working again. All right, so 3 terms you should know. Ebbinghaus's retention curve, what they found is that if you rehearse something one night, let's say you study tonight, all right, your retention of it, you study tonight for the test on Friday, all right, but you don't study tomorrow night, all right, your retention of information goes down, all right, but the more you practice information on day 1, the less you have to practice it on day 2, and so on and so forth. Learning something a second time is easier than learning it the first time. All right, we don't need to worry about that. So I think what's confusing about this unit is there are all these different models for memory. Like this unit doesn't necessarily flow all that well. The 2 models for memory, what is called the information processing model, right, which was the early one, and now the 3-stage model. The way that we look at them now is we kind of combine both of them. Like they both explain just different processes of memory. Right? The information processing model has 3 different steps to it. Right? When we getting information into the memory system is called encoding. All right, we'll talk more later about different ways that we encode information, but just the process of getting it in there is encoding. Just like coding into if you have a Word document that you have open, and you're typing something in there, you're encoding that information into the Word document. Right? Once information is encoded, once we encode it, then that information, meaning we commit it to the memory system, that information goes into storage. Okay? Storage is our way of retaining memory. All right, guys, I really need you to come in here at the right time, even if you leave early, because it's annoying going back and forth between screens. All right? And we'll talk more about storage. There are 3 different levels of storage. There's sensory memory, there's short-term memory, and then there's long-term memory. All right, and then once information is in storage, it doesn't do us any good if it's in there if we can't get it out. All right, so retrieval is the process of getting information out of storage and into conscious awareness. And we'll talk more about there are different ways in which different retrieval cues and whatnot that help us get that information out. All right, so the 3-stage model looks at the 3 different levels of storage. All right, so the 3-stage model includes sensory memory, we'll talk more about, working memory, and long-term memory. And then you can see how information is encoded from sensory memory into short-term or working memory, and then it's encoded again into long-term storage, and then from long-term storage, we then have to retrieve it into conscious awareness, which is our working memory. And we don't have to worry about that. All right, so the way that they understand how our memory processing system works is essentially we have what is called a dual-track memory, or a dual-track mind, where it's almost like things that are going on in here are layered, right? And some of the processing that we are doing, we are consciously aware of. Some of the processing that we are doing, meaning processing anything that's going on around us, we are not consciously aware of, right? Effortful processing is getting things into memory. Basically, again, in this unit, there are a lot of terms that essentially mean the same thing, but they're just different ways of saying it. So effortful processing is when we have to put effort into encoding information into memory, like in learning things in school. In terms of long-term memory, right, these are generally what are called explicit memories or declarative memories. They are called this because this is memory that we are consciously aware of and that we can declare. So I can declare that I know something. This explicit memory is made up of facts and experiences, so things you learn and then life experiences. All right? And then some stuff starts off effortful, but then goes into the automatic processing system. So for instance, when you are first trying to learn how to read, it takes effort. Right? But eventually, once that thing that took effort becomes automatic. Okay? Automatic processing is just our unconscious processing of just everyday life events. Okay? It doesn't take any conscious effort. We automatically process and commit to memory space, meaning, so an example of this sort of automatic processing would be cognitive maps, right? How much of the length of time that has passed, right? We generally have a good idea. We can estimate how long we've been sitting in class for, how long you've been talking on the phone for, and whatnot. And then frequency, we just notice, like if somebody does something, has like a habit that they do, we'll start to notice it. Generally, these types of memories in long-term storage are referred to as implicit memories or non-declarative, because they're things that we are not just consciously aware of. They are things that we can do. Right? Implicit memories are procedural memories, like riding a bike. Classical conditioning associations, Pavlov's dog just automatically salivated to the sound of the bell once they learn that association. So effortful versus automatic processing, two different processing systems, and they happen simultaneously with one another. All right? Oh, damn, this is all in a report. All right, so some ways in which we can effortfully process. All right, one of the ways is through the use of chunking, which is taking large amounts of information and grouping it together. So this chunking you're studying, right, would be a very, very effective way, right, to study for the AP exam. Don't just study it all in one big block, right? Group it together into smaller blocks, okay? This is how we remember phone numbers, right? Because we'll get to it, but with short-term memory, capacity is about 5 to 9 pieces of information. With a phone number, chunking it into area code like that helps us more easily remember it. Mnemonic devices are any sort of memory aids, right? And they love using terms from this unit on the concept application FRQs, just FYI. All right, so peg words, vivid image, these are all things they probably want to ask you about, so I'm not going to really go over them. Okay, and then some of the other ways that we found to more effectively, effortfully process information. All right, rehearsing something. Okay, that is the learning, the forgetting curve. Right, the more you rehearse on day one, the less you have to on day two. Spacing it out, don't study all at once. Our brain can't handle that. All right, so also with effortful processing, not all effortful processing is created equal. And this is really important, especially going into the AP exam. Shallow processing is essentially when we just encode the most basic level of the information. All right, it is very superficial. It might just be a fact about something. Okay, so if we're trying to remember words, if we're trying to remember like what a word means or whatever, right? Just like picturing what the word looks like would be shallow processing. Or just trying to memorize, if you're trying to learn a language, right? The way they a lot of times teach you language is you just repeat after somebody. The teacher says a sentence, then you say a sentence, right? It might help you just with repetition, but it's not actually really helping you in understanding, right? And then acoustic and visual encoding. Acoustic encoding is encoding using sound. So using the sound of a word. So if you're trying to remember a word and you just repeat it over and over to yourself, that's acoustic encoding, right? And then visual encoding. You're trying to remember a word. You're trying to commit a picture of the word to memory, or what the individual letters in it is. Okay, and another term for this in how we often use this type of memory aid is called maintenance rehearsal. Maintenance rehearsal is basically just repetition of something. Works sometimes if you're just trying to memorize the quadratic equation, right? But it is going to give you a very, very base level of knowledge of whatever it is, and you're not going to retain it for as long.
Would that be for learning a language?
Sure, yeah. If you just try to learn it through repetition, you may be able to just repeat certain phrases but chances are you're not actually going to like be able to learn how to fluently speak the language.
Right. Okay.
Yep. Okay, we don't have to worry about that. Okay, these are just examples of acoustic and visual encoding. All right, if we really want to commit something to memory, all right, through the levels of processing model, all right, deep processing is where we use different devices to actually get it in there and give it meaning. All right, encoding using meaning, including learning the meaning of words, is what is called semantic encoding. Semantics is meaning. The semantics of language is the meaning of language. If you make information personally meaningful, all right, I've told my classes, all right, the best way, with the real life examples, you can take mine, and that's fine, but the way that you're really going to learn and retain the information is if you come up with your own examples that tie back to you, what is called the self-reference effect. Okay, this is also referred to as elaborative rehearsal, linking memories with, linking things with images, making associations, tying information back to prior knowledge. I try to do that a lot in here, saying, all right, let's tie this back to a concept that we learned earlier in the class. All right, all of those are ways to elaboratively rehearse information so that it actually gets committed to memory. And we retain it on a deep level. All right, so I'm going to get into the three-stage model, which is sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. So as information comes in, it goes through three different steps. All of the information that is coming in at any given time, everything that our sensory system is taking in, all the sights, if you look around right now, all of the sights, smells, sounds, tastes, touch, all of these different things is coming through the receptors, through these different receptors, into our sensory memory. Most information that comes in and is out of our sensory memory. We hardly even process it. Okay, it's not even close to be committed for it to be committed to memory. However, all the sensory information that we selectively attend to. So you all are trying to listen to me right now, so you're tuning out everything else. It's coming in, but you're not even consciously processing it. All the information that we selectively attend to can be held in sensory memory for a very, very short period of time. There are two types of sensory memory storage, so the sensory memory that you need to know. Iconic memory is the split-second holding cell, based on our selective attention, for visual information, for all visual information that comes in. So if you're looking around, you process the color of like the shirts that everybody is wearing, but as soon as you look away from it, that information comes into your sensory memory, you process it, not even consciously process it, and then it's out because you're not really selectively attending to it. But an easy example to demonstrate how fast sensory memory is if you put your hand up in front of your face like this, right, look at it, and then wave it back and forth really quickly, right, you should see a trail. Like you should, just like with a fan or the rubber pencil illusion, you should see a trail. That split-second visual memory is your is your iconic memory of where your hand just was. The other type, so that one lasts for 1 second or less. The other type of sensory memory that we need to know is what is called echoic. Echoic is for auditory information, and just think echo. Oh, sorry, a mnemonic to help you remember iconic is eye. You can just draw like an eye and then iconic. It's your eyes. Echoic memory lasts for a little bit longer. Think about when you're listening to somebody talk. You can retain that information for a little bit longer. It's because the auditory system isn't bringing in as much at a split second. There's a lot more visual information coming in, so we don't have time to selectively attend to it. And probably due to the fact that humans rely so much on language that we kind of need to have a longer holding cell for that. All right, so name that you might need to know. Well, I don't think I even put his name on here, and I'm forgetting it. What the hell's Oh, name that I doubt you'd be asked about this, but you could be, is George Sperling. He is kind of he did an experiment. He's the person who discovered sensory memory. Not invented it, discovered it. All right, so once information is selectively attended to and was kept in sensory memory long enough, it is then transferred. All right, selectively attending to it creates new neural pathways, and then by paying attention to it, it is very quickly transferred over to the next stage of memory, right, in the three-stage model, what is called short-term or working memory. Short-term or working memory. Short-term is kind of the old term for it. Working memory is a newer term for it. Right? Short-term or working memory is kind of whatever we are paying attention to or whatever we are thinking about at the time. So you're trying to listen to me, right? That information is going from your sensory memory into your short-term memory, and you're trying to hold on to it long enough to remember it. Also, if I ask you, what is your phone number, you're not actively thinking about your phone number at all times, but you're able to retrieve it. And when you retrieve it and you tell me your phone number, that is coming from long-term memory into working memory. Working memory is just whatever we are working with at the time. Okay? So, whatever the brain is actively processing. The magic number for short-term memory is about 5 to 9 pieces of individual pieces of information for around, at the max, 20 seconds. You could also see this shown as 7 plus or minus 2, meaning 7 plus 2 pieces or minus 2 pieces, which would be 5 to 9. All right, so if information information comes into short-term memory, if you're able to encode it, then that's good. But if you think about, a lot of times information comes into short-term memory and then you're not able to encode it and it's lost. Think about when you're reading a book and you realize you just read a page and you have no idea what the hell it actually said, like you didn't retain any of it. What you were reading was coming into your short-term memory, but it wasn't transferred over to a larger holding cell. Information that has been successfully encoded using either maintenance rehearsal using either shallow or deep processing, or maintenance or elaborative rehearsal, that information is then transferred into longer term storage, what is called long-term memory. Long-term memory, they believe, is unlimited, although that doesn't mean everything that you commit to long-term memory stays in there. And it contains what we talked about earlier that I'll go more in depth on, explicit and implicit memories. So, explicit or declarative memories, which are memories that we are consciously aware of, meaning that we can pull these from long-term into working memory. Okay, also called declarative. Two types of these. Semantic memories, which are things that you know. And then episodic memories, which are life events. Things that you remember from your life, like episodes of a TV show. Most of this is done in the frontal lobe. Just remember, the frontal lobe is our personality anyways, and memories make up who we are. And most of this processing, most of this encoding and storage is done by the hippocampus. Right? But the hippocampus does not actually store memories in it. The hippocampus processes them and sends them out to the rest of the brain to be saved. Explicit memories are retained, stored all over the cerebral cortex, but particularly in the frontal lobe. Implicit or non-conscious memories, also called non-declarative because we can't declare them, are automatic behaviors that we do. Right? Procedural memories like skills, tying your shoes, riding a bike, throwing a football. And then conditioned associations. Right? Most of these a lot of these are processed and stored in the cerebellum, particularly like classical conditioning associations, cerebellum. And then in an area I don't think that you would be asked about called the basal ganglia. But we've never even talked about that. So if you're asked about the basal ganglia, then, just guess. Okay, so implicit, explicit, things we know. Implicit, things we can do. All right, so why are some memories more vivid than other memories? Particularly with explicit memories. Emotion plays a big role in this. Okay? The hippocampus does most of the processing of explicit memories, but it is right next to the amygdala. And if you remember, the amygdala is involved in emotion and sending out emotional signals, particularly ones like fear and anger. What they found is that when we were excited or stressed, okay, contrary to like the idea of like repression, that the release of stress hormones like cortisol and the increase in glucose in the brain helps focus memory. So actually, more stress, they found stressful situations create more vivid memories, not the opposite. We don't repress them, they tend to be more vivid. Another type of unique memory that they don't really categorize, I guess it is in explicit memories, right? But these are memories that are particularly emotional, or what are called flashbulb memories. Flashbulb memories they're called flashbulb because it's like a snapshot of an emotionally significant moment. These can be global, like most of us probably remember watching the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. You have a vivid emotional memory with that. A flashbulb is It's not. It is a type of episodic memory, but it's not classified. It's just remember, flashbulb, vivid, emotionally significant moment. That is a very vivid memory. The difference here with these is a lot of times flashbulb memories tend to not be very accurate, and they can be altered by time. Like I have a vivid memory of 9/11, but I'm 34, I was 14 then, all right, that memory, what I remember about 9/11 may actually be totally incorrect at this point. Like in my personal experience on 9/11, okay? And so it can be a global, most of the time these are global, right? But not always. When was your first kiss? Remembering to hear that somebody died, blah, blah, blah. So just know flashbulb, very vivid, emotionally significant memory, but not always accurate. It is prone to misinformation, and is prone to memory reconstruction that we'll talk about. All right, so how does our brain store long-term memories? Well, as we know, when we learn something, learning is the process of neurons communicating with each other and forming stronger and stronger neural connections. The more neurons communicate with each other, just like with people, right? When two people meet each other, they don't know each other, it's awkward. Communication is difficult. But the more that you're around somebody, the easier communication becomes because you have more points of communication. You find out you have more in common. Neural communication is the same way. Okay? Memories are due to the synaptic changes, right, during learning, what is called long-term potentiation, or LTP. Glutamate, the neurotransmitter glutamate, plays a really big role in this. Okay, but as it says on here, neurons become more efficient in communication. The more you rehearse something, the stronger. Sakir, I answered that. I answered that. Okay. There's not really a difference. Flashbulb is just more emotional, and it's just not categorized in there for some reason. Okay, the more you rehearse something, the stronger those neural connections become. All right, LTP. All right, so there you go. All right, so let's talk about how do we, once information is in long-term memory, it doesn't do us any good if we can't get it out. Okay, so that's what we need retrieval for. All right, memories are, and we're talking mostly about explicit memories right now. Okay, memories are stored in webs in our brain. All right, we have the neural connections are called traces, but when we form memories, the hippocampus sends it out, and the hippocampus tries to send it somewhere where it thinks it's going to be stored the best. And so a lot of times, one new memory will be linked with a previous memory. Right? And a lot of times these are linked by meaning. Right? This is something that is called, it's a new thing, new term, semantic network theory. But this is why remembering one thing, you say like something jogs your memory on one thing, and then you're like, oh shit, that makes me remember this thing and this thing, because all of our memories are all linked to one another. All right, so we've already talked about that. Those are ways to retrieve. All right, that's it. All right, another retrieval cue. All right, one of the ways that we remember stuff is priming. Okay, priming is when we make some sort of unconscious association between one thing and another. All right, and if I say one thing, it makes you think of something else. So I didn't do it. I did it with my classes, but like at the beginning of this PowerPoint, I just had a picture of ducks up, right? And I didn't really give any explanation for why. But then when I came to this slide and asked them to write down what they were most likely to see, what they saw, the vast majority of people would put a duck. Because there was already, they didn't even think about it, but there was already the unconscious association there. If I put a picture of rabbits up, because this thing is called a duck rabbit, if I put a picture of a rabbit up, be more likely to see a rabbit. All right, context-dependent memory. One way that we can be primed is that when we are in certain environments, trigger certain memories. Chances are you remember psychology the best. If you're in person, you're going to remember it the best in the classroom that you learned it in. They found that they've done experiments where they had people like learn a list of words underwater while they were scuba diving, and then some learn a list of words above water. And they found that the people where they learned it, they were able to retrieve, if they learned it underwater, they actually remembered the words better later when they were underwater again. Okay, so this is now referred to as the encoding specificity principle. We most likely remember things where in the environment where the memory was formed. I cannot remember why I have a picture of myself on this slide. So context is just surroundings. Right? Another type of retrieval is what is called state-dependent memory. If you get really drunk on Saturday night and you put your keys somewhere, and then you wake up Sunday morning and you can't remember where you put your keys, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but it's true. Okay? If you learn something in a state of mind, you remember it better when you're back in that state of mind. So if you put your keys somewhere where you were drunk and you can't remember the next morning when you're sober, actually, they found you have slightly better recall of it if you just get drunk again. Okay? Because it's the same state of mind that you were in before. So state-dependent. And then a type of state-dependent memory is what is called mood-congruent memory, which is where if we learn something or whatnot when we were in a certain mood, you're actually going to recall it better when you're back in that mood. So I know the example I always use in class is, and most of y'all probably know this, like let's say that your mom asked you to do the dishes before she got home from work, and you forget to, and she comes home, and she's like, damn it, you forgot to do dishes this time, and last week you did this thing that pissed me off, and the week before that you did this thing that pissed me off, and all of a sudden it's just like a shitstorm of like every time she was mad at you, right? That's mood congruent memory. Okay? All right, other retrieval cues we have. Let's see. The only one we haven't got, rosy retrospection. Rosy retrospection actually should be in should probably not be in this slide because it's not really a retrieval cue. I don't think it's more of misinformation. Rosy retrospection, though, is our tendency to. You may have something happens to you, all right, and it's not enjoyable. All right, the longer the time passes after the thing that happened to you that you didn't like, our memories of things actually get better when we look at them in hindsight. Okay, so we tend to remember things from the past as being more favorable than they were in the present. This explains why people get back together with ex-boyfriends and girlfriends. You've broken up for a little while, and then you start thinking and be like, oh, that wasn't that bad. You get back together, and then you realize, oh yeah, it was. All right, another way to recall, okay, serial positioning effect. Serial positioning effect is if we have a list of words, a list of things, of items, of pictures, of anything, all right, and we are told to memorize the list. Let's say that it's a grocery list. We have a tendency to remember, so serial position is series. We have a tendency to remember the first items and the last items the best. That's why it's easy to remember the first couple presidents, easy to remember the last couple presidents, hard to remember the ones in the middle. Recalling stuff from the beginning is primacy. Recalling stuff from the end is recency, because it's the most recent. We also remember, I don't think you wouldn't be asked about this, but we also remember things that are unique in there. That is called the von Restorff effect. Which is why, like Abraham, we remember Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy and FDR and all those, because they're unique. All right, so are there any questions about retrieval? We might actually, we're going to finish. Okay, so now that we talked about getting stuff out, well, what happens when we forget? And what happens when our memories aren't actually accurate? And a lot of them aren't. Okay, so amnesia is any sort of loss of memory. Generally explicit memory. Most of the time, people who have amnesia still remember how to do stuff. They still have their procedural memories, but they just don't have memories of, they don't have episodic or semantic memories. Two ways. All right, so we'll talk about this following a cognitive event is something like a TBI, traumatic brain injury, a stroke, an aneurysm, anything like that. Okay, probably the most common reason for amnesia. All right, so following a cognitive event, following a stroke, okay, anterograde amnesia is when you can no longer form new memories. You can retrieve old ones, but the hippocampus isn't processing memory. Like it's not able to send it out to the cerebral cortex to be stored anymore. So we can't form any new memories. You can remember this as anterograde is memory loss after the event. Anterograde is after. And I don't know. If anybody else has a better mnemonic than that, let me know. Retrograde amnesia is when we are not able to retrieve stuff from the past. Okay, so the hippocampus does a lot of like retrieving stuff as well, like the librarian, right? Hippocampus isn't able to get in and get the old stuff, but can still form new memories. Right? Retro means past. If we want to tie this back to movies, okay, anterograde amnesia is 50 First Dates. And retrograde amnesia is The Vow. And then anterograde's also, there's a movie, some of you have probably seen it, Memento. If you remember Clive Wearing, the guy who has no memory at all, like he can't form any new memories, and he can't remember anything from the past, he has both of these. And that is because both of his temporal lobes, where the hippocampuses are, were destroyed by syphilis. All right, so why do we forget? Okay, 3 ways. If you understand encoding, storage, and retrieval, these are pretty straightforward. Encoding failure is just, all right, information comes into short-term memory, all right, but we don't do anything, we don't process it, and it doesn't go into long-term memory. We could call this like in one ear, out the other. All right, storage decay, also referred to as trace decay. Storage decay is, all right, the information was committed to long-term memory, but we didn't rehearse it. Okay, so it was in there, but we didn't practice it enough, and so those traces have started to disappear. Just like if you have a friend and then they move away, okay, you'll probably stay friends but as it gets further and further from that, you'll not be as good of friends. This was also studied by Ebbinghaus in what is called the forgetting curve. What he found when he was trying to see, he was memorizing lists of meaningless syllables, like things like CBT. Okay, things that didn't have any meaning to them. And what he found was that after one day, after rehearsal, the next day he retained 60% of the meaningless syllables, but without rehearsal the next day, that it dropped down to 30%. But what he also found was that we tend to forget a lot of stuff really quickly, and then it levels off. And the rest of it it's gonna take a lot longer to forget. That's why you'll probably remember just some random stuff from this class, even though you won't remember most of it. All right, and then finally, all right, forgetting as retrieval failure. Retrieval failure it's also called an interference. Right? The memory's in there, okay, but you might not have the proper cues, the proper retrieval cues, and so it is, you're not able to get it out. This is what tip of the tongue is, okay? Tip of the tongue is, it's in there, you know it's in there, you just can't quite get it out right then. Two types of retrieval failure. Retroactive interference is when sometimes information gets in the way of us retrieving other information. That's what interference is. Retroactive interference is when you learn something new, and by learning something new, those new memories get in the way of you being able to retrieve the old memories. Right? If you learn Unit 10 in this class, and because you learned Unit 10, you now can't remember Unit 9, that's retroactive interference. Proactive interference is the opposite. When something that you learned a while ago gets in the way of you being able to retrieve new information. Right? If your dog dies and you get a new dog, but you keep calling the new dog by the old dog's name, that's proactive interference. Way to remember this is porn. Proactive, old interferes with new. Retroactive, new interferes with old. All right? Any questions there on that? Everybody get I think everybody already had the mnemonics, so. These come up, these ones I'll tell you again, come up a lot on FRQs. The memory unit's really popular on FRQs because it's very easily applicable to scenarios, especially like education type scenarios. All right, now how about last thing, okay, motivated forgetting, all right, as retrieval failure. Sometimes we forget something on purpose, or we change our memory on purpose because we could call this a defense mechanism, protect our ego, right? And a lot of times this motivated forgetting or memory alteration happens because we just end up kind of convincing ourselves of something. More often than not, it's like convincing ourselves, remembering something in a different way to make ourselves feel better or look better in a certain situation. All right, we don't need to do that. Okay, so last couple things, almost done. Memory reconsolidation or memory reconstruction. These can sometimes be known as false memories, but what we know about memory is that the more often you retrieve a memory, so you're thinking about something a lot. This might be why rosy retrospection happens. You're thinking about something a lot, you think about it, it's in your working memory, and then it goes out, so it goes back into the memory system. The more often a memory is retrieved and then restored, the more altered it becomes. Okay? Each time we restore it, we add some little thing to it or take out some little thing from it, whether we realize it or not. All right, so memory reconsolidation, when we memory consolidation is the formation of memories. Memory reconsolidation is the reformation of memories. And we know that oftentimes, yeah, sure, it can be a good thing sometimes. Sometimes by restructuring, traumatic memories or whatnot, it can. They actually use this in a form of therapy now. Okay, the repetitive eye movement therapy is a type of memory reconsolidation where they change the association with it. So yeah, it definitely can be. All right, we don't need to talk about repression. I think you all know what that is. It's not real, or it's not real in the majority of cases. All right, so misinformation effect and false memories. Okay. Elizabeth Loftus is the name that you need to associate with false memories. Okay? And what we have learned is that not only do our memories change slightly, they get slightly altered every time we retrieve them and then restore them. Information that comes in after the fact. We form memories after the fact. Okay? That is how memories, especially life events, memories of things are formed after they happen. And we put our own spin on it. Right? Misleading information can distort our memories. If we're told something incorrect, right, then we might incorporate that into a memory, therefore altering the memory and causing possibly a false memory. This is the misinformation effect. Interestingly, Loftus did her research on this. They became interested in this because when Elizabeth Loftus was 13, her mother drowned in their swimming pool. And afterwards, a while afterwards, her uncle told her that she was the one who had found her mother in the swimming pool. And all of a sudden, this flood of memories came back to her. She's like, oh my God, I remember all that now, blah, blah, blah. And this is how repression works a lot of the time. remember all that now. And she formed all these really vivid memories of finding her mother floating in the swimming pool and whatnot. She came to find out years after that it actually wasn't true. That she had not found her mother. Somebody else had. That had been misinformation. But all of a sudden from that, she formed this very vivid memory. So most of her research has been used in terms of eyewitness testimony, which we know is very, very unreliable and is not really used in court cases anymore. The famous experiment that she did was having everybody watched a car crash. But then afterwards, she asked the participants how fast the cars were going when they either bumped or smashed into one another. And they, based off of this leading word, based off of just the way that they framed it, all right, their memory of it was altered. People who were asked how fast they were going when they smashed estimated, I think, like 10 miles an hour faster than people who had been asked bumped. Now, they had all seen the same thing. Okay. All right. Lost them all. I don't need that. All right. Last thing. Okay. Another type of misinformation: source amnesia. Source amnesia is when we remember something. We know we have a memory of something, but we don't know where we learned it from. We don't know where it came from. So, a famous example of this was the news reporter Brian Williams, who told this story on air about being in a helicopter in Iraq that was shot at. And he had a very vivid memory of it. It turns out it never happened. Okay, and so it may have been that he was told this story by somebody else, and then all of a sudden, it just kind of became his own story or whatnot. He could have been lying, but I don't think so. Okay, so that source amnesia is just not remembering where you learned something. All right. Anybody got any questions about anything?